Hey all, this is CowTipper Vern again. This is going to be part 2 of my episode about uncertainty and not knowing stuff. I'm just going to pick up right where I left off on part 1. So if you haven't heard that one, go back and listen to that one. It'll make this one make more sense, especially at the beginning. This episode is just about dealing with uncertainty, how the 2x2s dealt with it, how I dealt with it in leaving, and how I deal with uncertainty now. All right, back to it. Certainty is a funny thing, though, because certainty isn't the same as being correct. This is an obvious point, but certainty isn't the same thing as being correct. Certainty doesn't mean you have knowledge. Certainty doesn't equate to knowledge. It equates to our perception of our knowledge, which really is just an identifier. It's just a team label. Certainty really is just subjective in a lot of cases. If something's not absolutely knowable, then our interpretation of what we know is kind of important. I mentioned a second ago that I've changed my mind on a lot of things. Some of that's been political, and I try to keep politics out of this podcast, although that's getting harder and harder these days. But I used to be against things like intersectionality. And when I hear people talking about things that I consider woke now, I would kind of roll my eyes and move on. And I've started listening to them more now because I realize that perspective really matters to our perception of what we know and what we can know and what we can't. A lot of what we know is based on our experience. And we can only experience so much. And me being who I am, I can only experience my version of it. So the intersectionality of other people's experiences leading them to their version of understanding is a pretty big deal, actually. Again, that doesn't mean someone else is right, doesn't mean I'm right, doesn't mean either of us are wrong, but we may both have valid, if sometimes contradicting viewpoints. If I'm honest, a lot of what I know is subjective and based on my own experience, and I was raised 2x2, so a lot of my perception of the world is still 2x2 perception. I mentioned on Mike's interview episode that for a long time I called myself cultural Christian. I don't really anymore for a lot of reasons because I don't like what's happening in cultural Christianity right now. But part of why I did that, even as I was slowly believing less and less, was because I knew that my worldview was that. It was a nominally Christian, Protestant, whatever, white version of the world. When I think of God, I thought of that God. But that wasn't certainty. That wasn't knowledge. That was just perception and vantage point and subjectivity. Looking back on 2x2 life, I realized that a lot of my belief system was just imposing a certain lens, putting a certain lens over things and then calling that my reality. When in doubt, pull up the professing lens and impose that on whatever you're doing. Look at everything through the 2x2 lens, and that's what matters. Humans don't like subjectivity for some reason. We don't like talking about that. We'd like to know that we actually know. When somebody has a different viewpoint, we'd like to think that we're right and they're wrong, because that's easy. It's less cognitive load, less of a load on our brain. A huge part of my deconstruction has been listening to different apologists within Christianity, different apologists and theologians and people like that. And like I've mentioned, I was expecting explanation, and I felt what I got was rationalization instead. And that's okay. That's their jam. That's how they can talk to their people. But it didn't work for people like me because there was nothing objective to hang on to. It was all subjective. Those types of people like to talk about objective morality. A lot of my frustration around that had to do with morality and looking at ways to map morality. How can I make good decisions around things that I don't know? Or how can I make decisions around topics where I don't know everything? How can I find a belief system that helps me make those decisions? That's what I was looking for. And what I got was just a lot of people saying, you got to do this because objectively you should do this. And then they would justify that with a bunch of readings of scripture that are not objective at all, in my opinion. Well, I don't know if it's just my opinion. It's the opinion of Bible scholars. The fact that Bible scholars read the Bible completely different than theologians is a fun thing to think about, actually. And I've done a whole breakdown of that. I did a video earlier called Won't Apologize about my foray into apologetics. And so I won't go into that anymore here, but that was one of my problems with the whole thing, is that I was looking for some sort of framework that explained morality in a way that was portable across time, that you could project it onto any situation and also use it across time, and none of that actually worked, as far as I could tell. It just didn't make any sense the way they were saying it. Essentially, this is what caused me to start deconstructing in the first place. I've said it a bunch of different ways, and every time I say it, it's a little bit different because it's a complex topic, but realizing that the 2x2 system didn't work in real-world situations was jarring to me, and I'm finding that for my own uses, Christianity's not working either. It doesn't reflect reality. It rationalizes its own inability to reflect reality. It rationalizes its own inability to give us good morals. At best, that's what it does at best. At worst, it rationalizes terrible morals. Morals, quote unquote, finger quotes in the air around morals, seem to be used to do two things. They resolve uncertainty, which is the point in a lot of cases. But moreover, they act as group identifiers. They act as branding for your team. I'm stealing a word from a comment on my Substack. Someone commented that Christian morals are kind of just branding. Christianity is branding. You're branding yourself as part of a team. And that's what it was in the 2x2s as well. It didn't matter if it was right or wrong or worked in any objective way. And at the end of the day, it didn't really remove any uncertainty either. They just ended up acting as team identifiers, flags to fly so you know who's on whose team. The way they resolved uncertainty is to just eliminate the uncertainty and tell you it doesn't matter. Well, that doesn't work for me anymore. I actually lean into uncertainty now because I think that's correct. And not just correct on a day-to-day basis, but finding a new set of beliefs or morals have to resolve that uncertainty in a reasonable way or deal with it in some other way that doesn't hurt people. I cannot rationalize bad activity. I can't rationalize people getting hurt while saying that the moral structure that caused that injury makes it okay. It doesn't. I'm not on a team anymore. I don't have to do that anymore. I don't have to rationalize bad activity or rationalize people's pain because the right team caused it. I don't have to do that anymore. And if that means that I'm taking myself away from a structure that gives me other answers, that might be okay. I might just have to give up on those answers to deal with what I have in front of me right now. That's how I feel at the moment anyway. Stepping away from religion has caused me to look back at religion a little bit and think a little more deeply about all this stuff. It seems to me that a lot of religion is just projecting meaning onto patterns. And that's not necessarily bad because that's how people work, right? That is how we are designed on some level. I'm using design as a generic word here, obviously. But if you're a believing person, you'll believe we're designed this way. And I think that has to be reconciled in some way. You have to reconcile the idea that, hey, we are this way. Why are we this way? And hand-waving away all of humanity as sinful doesn't work for me anymore at all. To the point of uncertainty, I don't actually know why we're this way. You could write evolutionary stories. You can write religious stories. But one way or another, we are this way. When we're uncertain, we look for patterns. And we try to match a narrative to those patterns to make the patterns make sense. But that isn't an explanation. That's just storytelling. And that's fine, but storytelling only gets you so far. And I've done an episode on storytelling as well. I think I called the episode The Art of Storytelling. I feel like I'm retreading back over a lot of stuff here, but it all synthesizes around this topic of uncertainty, at least in my mind. I feel like the topic of uncertainty envelops a lot of the things that make us make bad decisions sometimes. And I'm trying to create synthesis around it. I don't know if it's working, but I'm going to keep trying and I'm going to keep talking about it until it makes sense to me, at least. That storytelling manifests in the religious world as apologetics, and in the 2x2 world, not that they're entirely different, but in the 2x2 world, it's just making up stories. A lot of the certainty that we get from those rationalizations works for now. It makes us feel better, but you run into errors when you try to project too much of that onto reality and then give it the validity of coming from God. The reason some of these belief systems never grow and incorporate more of the real world into their belief system is because they think the original rationalization, the story they tell, is from God. So if there's any uncertainty around it, that's actually our fault because God resolved it already. He gave us fill in the blank. He gave us this Bible. He gave us these prophets. He gave us these ministers, whatever. And so when we're met with uncertainty, we immediately paper over it and call it faith. And I've already talked about that, so I'm not going to get too much more into that. The point here is I think a lot of religion is us painting God in our image. And in the 2x2s, we always talked about that too. We talked about how the worldly conception of God, worldly, finger quotes in the air yet again, the worldly conception of God was just their conception, but we had the right conception. Well, guess what? Every religion forever has said that. That's pretty normal. The evangelical community broadly bases their theology on the fact that they have the right version of God, and they're all different. Resolving the uncertainty by saying, I'm the one that's certain and you should be uncertain, doesn't work. Just because you think you have the correct version of God doesn't mean you actually do. It just means you feel comfortable that you do. It's your own perception of yourself. In a very real way, you're worshiping yourself at that point. And that's fine, by the way. I know I'm making it sound like an insult, but yeah, sometimes we have to God of the gaps our belief system. That's okay. I probably do it too. In fact, I know that I do it. I still think there's got to be something out there. There's got to be more. I just don't feel like my current understanding of religion helps that in any way. It doesn't work. The religion that I'm familiar with just doesn't work to make all of that make sense. And it doesn't resolve the uncertainty. We're all biased in our own special ways. And that's okay. Biases are reflections of our surroundings and our own personal experiences. I think two things can be true at once. We can have our experience in the world, but we can also be open to other people's experiences because it gives us a little bit more certainty of the world. We know a little bit more of how the world works if we can open ourselves to other people. All right, so how in the world is anyone supposed to make decisions if no big questions are knowable? It's really hard to have this part of the conversation without getting into specifics because at the end of the day, we have to deal with day-to-day stuff. The uncertainties we deal with, the uncertainties in life are easier to talk about when you are referring to day-to-day decision-making, not where do we go when we die. Those are kind of two different types of uncertainty. I mean, they're not kind of. They're very much two different types of uncertainty. The big picture uncertainty is mostly what I'm talking about. But my disillusionment with religion is that those two types of uncertainty are treated a little bit the same. The uncertainty of God is resolved through, just however we want by saying we understand God better than other people. And therefore, we use that authority to say that we understand the world better than other people. We understand things in the real world. That makes sense while you're inside that religion. If you think you understand eternity better than the person next to you, then you probably also think you understand day-to-day activities. You think you understand politics. You think you understand relationships. You think you understand everything from how to buy groceries to how to determine your sexuality. That's why religion gets so tied into politics, and I don't think that it should, because I think those are two different types of conversation. I don't think someone who says they know God well should run any part of government. I think that's stupid, and I don't think it should be on anybody's platform. I don't care if they are religious, but pulling that religion into their platform, making it a part of how they govern other people on day-to-day things, is ridiculous. But people do it, and people vote for it because they have the same banner. They're flying the same flag. So people inside of religions tend to feel pretty confident about day-to-day activities too. And I think that's another way of framing why I became so disillusioned with the 2x2s in religion, because they had a big picture view of the world that was sort of unknowable and unverifiable, but they felt pretty confident in it. They felt like their version of God was correct. And that caused them to project their own ideas. Again, God is the version of God that they believed in was their God. So essentially, they're worshiping themselves, in my opinion. That's just my opinion. But if you take that and start projecting it onto the real world, you start making mistakes and you lose sight of how much uncertainty there is in the real world too. Making decisions in the real world is tough, but we do a really good job of guarding for extreme downside of bad decisions. Well, we used to. COVID showed us that we don't anymore. Normally, we have a pretty good instinct around danger and severity. And no matter what we say about it, we actually perform it pretty well. We get in our car and we put on a seatbelt because it's uncertain whether we'll get in a car accident. It's not that we don't know people have died from car accidents. It's not that we don't think we'll be in one, but we know that the easy thing to do is put a seatbelt on because when that car accident happens, when and if it does, we're much more likely to be safe. We don't put the seatbelt on because we think we will get in an accident. It's not a likelihood thing, it's a severity thing. We put the seatbelt on not because we think we will, but because if we do, the downside will be less. That's the point. We're managing uncertainty on a daily, day-to-day thing very well. A small amount of effort can save us in severity. I started questioning the 2x2s during COVID when they showed really poor judgment around day-to-day life in a pandemic. It's not that anybody at any point understood how bad COVID could be. We didn't know. There's a lot of people washing groceries and stuff. We had no idea how bad COVID would be. We didn't know how it would be transmitted. We didn't know anything about it. But I drew a line in my life between me and people who couldn't show basic caution, if not for their own sake, for the sake of people around them. When I wear a seatbelt, I'm wearing it for myself, but I'm also wearing it for my family. Severity and probability are not the same thing. And a lot of our conversations around severity center around probability rather than severity itself. So many people during COVID were like, well, COVID can't be that bad. We got to wait and see how bad it is. And it's like, no, you don't want to wait and see how bad it is. You want to mask up first. Then you'll see how bad it is. Then you can make a decision. The professing people around me, the professing people in my life, didn't know how to do that. The only reason they didn't is because they thought they had a better view of what was happening in the world because they understood eternal better. They understood eternal things better. They thought they had a better view of the entire world and how the world interacts with itself because of the God that they believe they serve. That's wrong. I think that's stupid. And I think that's very, very damaging. There's an example that I often use, and I think I'm stealing it from somebody. I think I might be stealing it from a book, and I can't remember if the author's cool or not, so I'm not going to reference it. But it's an example I use to show probability versus severity. I talk about motorcycle riding, and trigger warning about motorcycles. If you know someone who has had an accident on a motorcycle, you can skip forward. I'll try to make this quick. My example is most motorcycle rides are uneventful. People get on them, they ride the motorcycle, they get where they're going, and they get off. A high percentage of motorcycle accidents result in death. There's two ways to talk about motorcycle accidents. One would be they're normally fine. The other would be they're very dangerous. Those sound opposite, but they're actually both true. Because one is talking about severity, the dangerous one, and one is talking about likelihood, the it's normally fine one. But only one of those is okay. Saying it's normally fine and telling somebody to get on a motorcycle is actually irresponsible from my standpoint. Now, if somebody wants to do that, if somebody wants to bring on the risk themselves, cool, go for it. But telling somebody, hey, go get on this, you'll be fine, because usually people are, is irresponsible. I wouldn't do that to somebody I care about. I've known many people personally who've been severely injured or killed on motorcycle accidents. If somebody rides a motorcycle 10,000 times and on the 10,001st time they're hit and killed by a car, no one's going to describe their experience with motorcycles as generally good. They'll talk about this person as someone who died on a motorcycle. The narrative around it is set to the extreme. The average experience is not always the story of the experience. It's not descriptive. Another way to put this is most of the people in the 2x2s are great people. Some of them are abusers. For someone who experienced lots of great people and then experienced abuse, the story within the 2x2s is not that they had a good time most of the time. The story is, I was abused. That's what matters here. Yes, it's an outlier. Well, I'm not sure that it is an outlier in the 2x2s. I think most people have been abused in some way in the 2x2s. But for the sake of this conversation, most of the story is often based on the outlier because that's what makes sense. This is why I would not recommend someone go to a 2x2 convention right now. Not because there aren't good people there. It's because there might be very, very bad people. That's important. The friends and workers trying to lean into the average experience are acting irresponsibly, in my opinion. Until they've guarded for the severe downside, until they've guarded for total loss or ruin, then they're not taking it seriously. If you read about decision-making and probability and stuff like that, a lot of times you'll see the word ruin. It's not because you have a bad experience sometimes. It means that the bad experience is so severe that it ruins the rest of the experience, although that's not what the word ruin means here. It actually means complete and total loss, like losing your life because you rode a motorcycle one too many times. Sorry to dog on motorcycles, guys. I don't mean to be against motorcycles. I know people have a great time on them. I'm just trying to use that as an example because it's very salient for a lot of people. It's salient for me. I've lost friends on motorcycles. Severity always outweighs likelihood, always. Resolving uncertainty by leaning into average doesn't make sense a lot of the time. because it's not descriptive of the actual problem you're facing. If complete ruin is possible, you have to consider that in your calculation, in your decision making. Faith is fine, but you got to limit it to low stakes things. That's what I'm getting at here. You can't let faith override your decision making that tells you to put a seatbelt on. And during COVID, faith was telling people not to put masks on and not to avoid situations that could be highly dangerous. That's what broke my brain during COVID. That's partially why I left. That's what led me to thinking, wait a second, this belief system is making life more dangerous for people who can't afford it. So, now that I've said all that, it would be a reasonable question to ask, why in the world am I talking about that when I'm talking about religion and eternity, though? Sure, I don't believe the 2x2's belief system, but when you're talking about severity versus likelihood, aren't you basically talking about Pascal's wager? Great question. I'm glad you asked. Pascal's wager, as I've talked before, is, well, I'm not very good at describing it, but this version is only invoked when talking to non-believers. There's another version when talking to each other, but the main version is, you should believe in God, you should believe in Jesus, etc. Because if you're right, you'll get heaven, you'll get a wonderful eternity. And if you're wrong, nothing happens. You'll just go away, you'll go to sleep. But if you don't believe in God, if you don't believe in our version of God, is usually what they're saying. If you don't believe, and you're right, nothing happens. But if you're wrong, you have hell to pay. You have a lost eternity. The wager being, why not lean on one side? Because the severity of being wrong is so high. Well, I've just been talking about how that should dictate your decision making. When you have uncertainty and when you really don't know, shouldn't you take the most conservative approach? If total ruin, if total loss is on the table, then shouldn't you account for that? That's essentially what I'm saying with Pascal's wager. So why in the world am I not in church right now? That's a great question. A couple reasons. The main reason is that I cannot describe the downside with the finality, with the specificity that I can with, say, the motorcycle accident example. Total loss, when you're talking about day-to-day decisions, might mean death, it might mean severe injury, it might mean damage of some kind, total loss of something, total ruin of something you own. When you're talking about spiritual things in eternity, it's not the same thing, because the downside seems to be clear to people, although never really described very well. But the upside of believing and finding eternity correctly immediately goes away once those groups start talking to each other. Like I said, Pascal's wager is only brought up when religious people are talking to non-religious people. When religious people talk to each other, they Pascal's wager each other too. It's this nesting doll of wagers because they all believe that each other's versions of God can't be correct. Back to, everyone's version of God seems to be their own version of God. They're worshiping their own specific version. They're decrying heresy left and right. They're constantly pointing out errors in each other's theology and calling them dangerous. The number of times I saw religious apologetics and theologians calling each other heretics, pointing out dangerous heresies in each other's philosophies and theologies, is innumerable, off the charts. They constantly do this to each other. So I have a hard time buying their version of Pascal's wager when the version of a good outcome, the non-ruinous outcome, seems to be made up entirely by themselves and isn't verifiable in any way and isn't used for other people either. If you truly believed what you were saying, if you were trying to resolve uncertainty for people and give them the best outcome, you would welcome more people into your tribe. You would want more people to believe like you, even if the exact details of what you believe are a little blurry. Maybe there's some unknown there. You would be okay with resolving that unknown and saying, hey, we're doing the best we can. They don't do that. The religious world does not do that. They view uncertainty as a failure because you don't have enough faith. So any uncertainty will always be met, in my opinion. This is just my opinion now, of course. But it seems to me that any uncertainty in religion is often met with, you don't have enough faith. But to resolve that uncertainty is to buy into the theology or the doctrine of the person who's talking. So I don't believe the Pascal's wager argument anymore. I can't. It's not that the downside is wrong. Maybe they're right. I might be headed straight to hell. I have no idea. But the upside, the positive result, the extreme result in the positive case is so ill-defined that it doesn't mean anything. And it seems to be limited to the person talking. So it doesn't resolve uncertainty at all, actually, in my opinion. So to summarize my feeling about belief in religion as it comes to resolving uncertainty is I don't think it does. I don't think it resolves anything. I think it puts us on a team where we get fellowship. There are other benefits, right? There are benefits around having a community, having fellowship. It's fun to wave a flag. It really is. It's fun to connect with people. Sometimes you get potlucks. I do miss casseroles. But it doesn't resolve the uncertainty. And it does create uncertainty, or it creates an unhealthy relationship to the uncertainty that we actually have power to deal with. We actually have enough information. Or if we don't, we know that we can make good wagers that offer safe, sustainable outcomes. And instead, religion seems to launder bad ideas and push people into situations that are bad, that are worse. The 2x2 world wants more people to come in. That's not safe. That's not healthy. They'll sell that idea on generally it's okay. Well, it might not be, though. And for people who go into the 2x2s, they might not be okay. And not just might have a bad day now and then. They might have a life-ruining experience. They might not. But the uncertainty around that is resolvable. Don't do it. Or do it, but wait until they've got a framework of better decision making. I just can't handle a belief system that resolves uncertainty and gives me knowledge, quote unquote, but in the meantime hurts a lot of people and then rationalizes that hurt. I can't do that. I just cannot do that anymore. And at the moment, that leaves me with no team. I'm not really on a team right now. And that's tough. I'm not sure what to do with that. And more to come on that. Maybe I'll do episodes later about what team I join. I don't know. But I cannot handle a system that launders bad outcomes through good intent. That's not okay. If the outcomes are bad, you need to fix the system. So it kind of sounds like I'm just judging 2x2s, though. I'm judging people for making honest mistakes. And I'm not. First of all, I don't think they're honest mistakes. I think what I'm doing is outlining why those mistakes are not honest. And even if they are, can be remedied, but the 2x2s have decided not to. Once again, pointing back to another episode, my last episode, I think was called The Current, where I'm saying they have access to better information. They decide not to use it because their current belief system doesn't allow it. So the errors they're making are forced errors. They're choosing to make those errors. But why am I being so hard on them? Hey, people make mistakes. People with the best intention make mistakes. Because, hey, we can't know everything, right? And that's true. I completely understand mistakes. I am very forgiving, maybe more than I come across. I'm forgiving of people who make mistakes, realize they're in a bad system, and say, wait a second, how can I fix this? There's a lot of people inside the 2x2s who tried to fix it from the inside, and I didn't think it would work, but I admired their effort, I have to say. I thought it was a lost cause. I think it was. I think that assumption has been proven out. But they were trying to resolve it because, hey, we realize we like our system, we like our community, we like our faith, we believe in God, and we like our connection to God the way we have it. But there are shortcomings. How do we address them? Errors made in trying to do the right thing are completely forgivable. Completely. I will always be very forgiving of people who misunderstand something, don't realize something, and try to correct once they do. Things like that. People who make mistakes can absolutely be forgiven, and I can have fellowship with people. I don't even agree with most of what they say. I can hang out with people I don't agree with or don't have the same faith or whatever. That's not a problem. But your relationship to what is unknown is important. And if you and I don't know something, and I'm fine with it, and you need to use your faith system, that's fine. But your faith system can't hurt other people. And my philosophy or theology, or whatever you want to call it, whatever I'm living by at the moment, can't be hurting people either. I need to be aware of that. And I have to take responsibility for that. And being inside a belief system absolves the responsibility. It removes the responsibility from the people in the system to make that evaluation and make that judgment on their own. That's my problem, typically. I also want to give a quick shout out to the opposite of what I'm saying. A real quick note, too, on skepticism. 2x2s are performatively skeptical about authority. And I think probably if you're listening to this and you're a 2x2, or if you've recently left, or you've left and you feel certain ways about politics or whatever, you'll probably note that I'm talking around the topic of skepticism. I'm a big fan of skepticism, actually. I think that no one should just take somebody's word on something. So if you have a tendency to be skeptical about something because you think, hey, how can that person know what they're talking about? Or how can that person be as decisive as they are because they can't possibly know more than me or know everything? That's fine. I get it. Nobody knows everything. That's the point. So when somebody comes across as authoritative, myself included, you shouldn't take what they say at their word necessarily. Skepticism is okay. Skepticism should lead you to looking into something more and finding other experts and stuff, though. Don't just do your own research, quote unquote. If I ever hear somebody say that again, I'm going to lose my mind, by the way. I did my own research. Okay, sure. You Googled. I know what happened. Sidebar. Skepticism tends to be performative. I can't stand performative skepticism because it's just skepticism without any attempt to resolve the uncertainty. And that's dumb. But it's fair to say that just because one thing is not credible doesn't mean that saying the opposite is credible. Just because something comes across as not credible doesn't mean the opposite is. So it's reasonable to be skeptical of lots of different things. I'm not going to talk about skepticism more, but I understand the impulse. I share it in a lot of ways. Back to the uncertainty principle, I try to have the following perspective when I can. I try to never judge someone for making an honest mistake. I never want to judge somebody for trying and failing. I'll never judge someone for not knowing something they just can't know. They don't have the information, they don't have access to it, but they're doing their best. I hope I can do that myself. I will judge someone harshly for not caring or not trying, or hand-waving away uncertainty with performative skepticism and then not making an effort. Not making an effort to learn more, do better, try harder, have empathy. All of those things are important to me. And it drives me crazy when people use their performative skepticism or lack of knowledge, lack of understanding as a reason to step away from their responsibility. We all have responsibilities, and we all don't know everything. So we have to make that work somehow. This is what's changed my viewpoint on a lot of 2x2 topics in the last few years. And on a personal level, religion as well, Christianity in general. My last episode pointed out that ignorance isn't an excuse for 2x2s anymore. They can't say that they don't know. They do know. They do know better. They have access to information, and they've decided not to use it. They're not trying. They've decided not to try. I don't fault them for not getting it exactly right, but it drives me crazy that they don't try. I think it's a morally reprehensible way to handle a crisis that they caused. Mistakes are completely normal. Making mistakes is a good way to learn. The 2x2s have made a lot of mistakes. In some cases, they've decided to do better in the coming days, but in a lot of cases, they've decided not to. And I think that's a problem. Part of the problem with being the one true way or having the one true belief system is that you don't believe you can make mistakes. You think you need to know everything you know. You think you need to know everything there is to know. You think that to show that you're being led by something eternal, God, the Spirit, whatever, that you have to just know. And so if you don't know or you make a mistake, you have to reframe it. The 2x2s have made so many mistakes as an organization or a group, a loosely formed group. They've made so many mistakes and hurt so many people, and yet they can never quite admit that. They can't quite bring themselves to admit that they have fundamental problems to their belief system, systemic problems among themselves, because they're the one true way, so they can't do it. They can't admit they don't know. It would be so much better to admit they don't know. It seems like there's some way to handle this. Play it off as faith or something. I don't know. But for some reason, they think they have to have this authority on earth, typically through the overseers, and down through the workers, down through the elders. In every meeting, you just have to know stuff. And that is your performative faith, is just knowing more than you actually do. When you're a 2x2, all of your shortcomings are personal. When you go to a meeting and talk about how you failed and you're going to do better in the coming days, those are personal failures. They're never systemic failures of the belief system itself. I think that's dishonest. I know it's dishonest, actually. Man, quick sidebar again. I saw another letter from an overseer this week full of things that were not true. Why do they do that? Why can't they just say, I don't know? Why don't they say, I'm going to talk to somebody God's leading me to talk to an expert. I don't know. I don't understand why they think they have to know everything all the time and have to be the experts. And then just make stuff up. Do they think we believe them? I don't know. It's confusing. Anyway, sidebar. I'll get back to the episode here. That drives me crazy, though. I can't believe several years now after the Brewer letter has come out, the overseers are still pumping out absolute nonsense in their letters. It's crazy. If you want to put together a design for this stuff that matches your faith, first of all, call it faith. Second of all, God teaches us through mistakes. We learn through mistakes. Having kids has opened my eyes to that. We make mistakes all the time, and that's how we learn. We ask extra questions. We stumble around in the dark a little bit sometimes. Trial and error works really well when you don't know. It would be so cool to be able to be in a belief system that incorporated the unknown as a mechanism for faith and learning, continuously learning about creation, if you believe that. If you believe you yourself are created and you believe that you live in creation, you are part of God's creation, it would be so useful to be able to see that as something to learn, like you're uncovering more and more of God's truth or whatever. I used to do that. That's how I reconciled a lot of my beliefs back in the day. When I was completely wholeheartedly in and believing, that's how I reconciled it. I didn't think of it as reconciling at the time. That's just what I believed. But over time, I've realized I can't actually do that because most belief systems demand that you know more than you know, demand that you display your faith by pretending you know stuff. Jesus even said in the Bible once something like, "They that are whole need not a physician." It seems like part of not feeling overconfident, not seeing yourself as whole when you shouldn't, would be understanding that you don't have all the answers, especially to large unknowable questions like eternity and faith and things like that. It seems like there's room within faith to admit not knowing and see that with humility. But for some reason, religions can't do that. I don't know if this is a new thing. I'd love to learn more about this and learn more about, have religions, especially evangelical Christian religions, always been this way? Have they always demanded that we know things? Have they always demanded perfect knowledge? I don't know. It's a very strange thing. It's very weird to look back on my faith and realize how different it was from typical Christian faith. And of course, now I don't have it. So I guess that's where that leads. There's one Bible quote I really don't like, and I don't know what it means exactly. Maybe I should message a Bible scholar or something. But there's a Bible verse that we used to use to mock people who were smart or learned in some way, educated people. We like to mock educated people sometimes. The Bible verse says something about people who are ever learning but never coming to knowledge. I think about that verse a lot because I used to really buy into it. I used to feel like people who constantly learned but never came to a solution to what they were learning, or learned and came up with more questions and constantly had more questions, I took that to mean that they weren't actually learning it. And I thought that that was a fulfillment of this verse in some way. Like, educated people never have any answers, do they? They just have a lot of questions. I don't exactly know what that verse means. And maybe it had a different purpose back when it was said or written down or whatever than it does now. But I think continually learning is healthy. I think coming to the end of your learning because you know it all doesn't make any sense. It doesn't match how brains work. It doesn't match human experience. You'll learn much more if you don't have to squeeze every idea or fact into a rigid pre-existing worldview. Life is so much more colorful and rich. Well, I'll just speak for myself. My life is more colorful and rich when I step back and say, I want to learn more. Show me everything. I don't believe that everything is unknowable, but I do think that I can't know everything. Vagueness, even if it's uncomfortable sometimes, and it is uncomfortable, sometimes not having answers for life's biggest questions and topics is uncomfortable, especially when raised in a group that told you you had to have those answers. But it feels more honest to me, and authenticity is really, really important. A couple final thoughts. I know this has been a long one. I've realized since leaving meetings that openness is not universal. Some people are more temperamentally open, some are less temperamentally open, and the need to have a system to live within tends to be common among people who are religious and less temperamentally open, and the inverse is true. And that's okay. We all have our own personalities. I don't want to critique anyone's personality necessarily. But I think these verbal exercises are good. These exercises in saying, how open am I to information I don't know? How open am I to experience? To be honest, I'm not actually sure how open I am temperamentally. I've never done any sort of psychological profile other than Myers-Briggs years ago, which doesn't really count. It's interesting, doesn't really count though. But openness is an emotional thing, and it's a temperamental thing. And if you're a trauma survivor especially, your brain doesn't necessarily process those things the best ways. And trauma counseling is really, really helpful for that. I think a lot of us are probably more open temperamentally than we were raised to be. And that's a discovery process, and that's learning about yourself, which was sinful as a 2x2, but if you're not a 2x2 anymore, it doesn't have to be. You get to decide. You get to decide if it's good for you. I'm very happy just admitting when I don't know now. It's so much more comfortable and so much more authentic. That's the most honest place for me to be right now. And in doing so, that allows me to learn more about everything. And not to just be smart about stuff and learn lots of facts, but to be open to experiences that enrich my life and hopefully improve my life, improve my relationships, improve how I interact with other people, with my family, with people that I work with, etc. I hope I can be a better admin of the group I'm the admin of as well, just by being open to other people and experiences and things like that, and not close myself off because the things I'm experiencing don't match a worldview that doesn't allow it. It's really hard to accept not knowing when we were raised the way we were. It's uncomfortable. It feels unstable. It feels really unstable and shaky to not have all the answers. But really what it is we're used to having people set those answers for us, to give us the meaning, to give us the systems. And we had heuristics that don't really make sense in the real world. So it's uncomfortable to not have those heuristics anymore. But those heuristics were things like, the more professing it looks, the better. The more it sounds like a worker, the better. Well, when you throw those out, it's amazing how much you actually use those heuristics. And they're not useful. So again, counseling is great. It's helpful to get perspective from people who are professionals at this kind of thing and can help you sift through it. Sift through the values you have. Where do you want your values to be? How do you want to interact with the world? How do you want to interact with the unknown? I'm embracing the ambiguity of life at the moment. That's the space I'm in right now as I say this, as I record this. I'm embracing it because I believe that's my reality. I haven't had the experience of coming out of the 2x2s and finding the real one true way. I haven't felt that way. And I feel very comfortable with ambiguity because I think ambiguity is real. I think vagueness, and I think that not having decisive answers to big questions is exactly where I am, and it's exactly honest right now. My very last topic on this long episode is something I see a lot in the X community, which is taking with us the pressure to know, even if we don't. Even if we're in a space where we're very happy exploring life and exploring our beliefs and exploring religion, possibly, exploring relationship, exploring who we are, and learning and trying to figure out where that fits into a worldview and how we view that with eternity in mind, things like that. We feel like there's a lot of pressure to know. We still feel that way. As we make decisions and step out of our comfort zones, there's going to be people at every step of the way who ask us why we're doing that, who critique those decisions, as if they think we've now moved on to something we know is more correct, and we now have to defend that. And I often feel there's a knee-jerk reaction, an understandable reaction, that can be a little bit defensive. We feel defensive because it's like we're trying to figure things out, and we have people saying, well, why don't you know? Why haven't you figured this out? Why are you saying that? You really believe that? We feel like we have to defend our choices. The first place you see that is in exit letters. When people leave, they're leaving the 2x2s. They're in an extremely raw, emotional place. And the first thing they want to do is comfort the people they were leaving. Oftentimes, they're trying to reassure the people that caused them to leave. They're trying to reassure those people that there's nothing personal. It's still fine. I'm just trying to find my own thing here. And we feel defensive about those choices. because we know they're going to get critiqued. But that's a window into why we feel that way when you think about it. When you think about what those exit letters mean, we're answering our own question here. A lot of the pressure to know things that we actually don't know came from the system that we apologize to as we leave. I didn't write an exit letter, and I think it's fine when people do. I have no feelings one way or another about people writing exit letters. But I think they're an interesting window into our own motivations and our own discomfort with the unknown that we're going into. Assuring people that we have a better way and this is good for us is interesting because that should be implied. No one's leaving the 2x2 so they can have a worse time or a worse life. Nobody's doing that. Everybody's doing it because it's better for them. And yet we have to constantly convince the people we left behind, at least spiritually left behind, not maybe physically or emotionally. The people in the 2x2s, we have to look back at them and say, everything's fine, everything's okay. Because we know on some level that they need to know. I promise you, we're not going to convince them. We're not going to convince them that we've done something different and it's good for us. They don't believe that. They know what's good for us. They already know. Well, that's fine. They can know. They can know that stuff. And we can learn. And maybe someday we'll know. Maybe someday we'll feel just as convinced of our new belief system, whatever it is, as we ever were of the 2x2s. I can't imagine that personally, but who knows? Maybe we will. Maybe we'll be out of the liminal space completely. It's going to be different for everybody, I have a feeling. But hopefully we can all connect together as X2x2s around the idea of we're learning, we're figuring these things out. We're learning about ourselves. We may not have all the answers. We may have more questions than answers, but that's okay for us. Or maybe it's just about the journey, not so much about the destination. Maybe. Who knows? Sorry if that sounded a little worldly.